And welcome to Chalk Talk, the pro football focused DFS podcast. I'm your host, Scott Barrett, and manning the co-pilot seat is DFS savant Tyler Buecher. Tyler, how are you?
Doing great, Scott. We're getting down to the final hours right before week one. I can't wait, man. I can't wait.
All right, well, today we're going to be talking about general DFS tournament and GPP strategies. Tyler, what is this GPP? Is that a grand piano party? A giggly pink penguin?
A GPP is a guaranteed prize pool, and that's where the prize pool is guaranteed. Basically what that means is they're going to be doing a general top-heavy large payout. These are the tournaments you see heavily advertised on TV, the $1 million for first place. They're normally tiered payouts going down from there. Generally in the 22% to 26% area is what you'll see the top players get paid out. It hinders on the buy-in as well. There's a lot of factors that go into that, like a $333 contest may pay out the top 28% of the field, while a $3 one may pay out just the top 23%. There's a lot to it.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. When we're talking about DFS tournaments or GPPs, as opposed to cash games, which we talked about last week, the difference really comes down to how top-heavy the payout structure is. It could be a pool of just 6 players to upwards of hundreds of thousands. In a 50-50 cash game, the top 50% of lineups win money. But in a GPP, it could be the case where only the top 10% walk away with anything. And you really need to adjust your strategy based on that payout structure. The more top-heavy, the more unique your lineup needs to be to separate yourself from the crowd, take home a big prize. And then the less top-heavy a tournament will be, I'll play it a little bit more conservative. I'll chase value a little bit more rather than be worried about ownership percentages.
Yeah, and that makes sense. What we're looking for here is a way to take that top first place prize, and in order to do so, you do need to differentiate yourself from the field. It's a very different strategy than our cash game pod.
Right. So 2 other things to look at when selecting a tournament, one of which is the rake. So rake refers to the commission or the site's cut of the action in any tournament. So you need to just be cautious of entry fees. Typically, the higher the entry fee, the lower the rake. Some tournaments are a lot better than others in this regard. For instance, DraftKings Millionaire Maker has an insanely high rake. I really don't play it too much anymore. It kind of feels more like a lottery ticket than a tournament just because of how top-heavy it is, how high the rake is, compared to some other smaller tournaments I might be interested in playing. One other important thing to note is that because these prize pools are guaranteed, if a league doesn't fill, that really raises your chances of you making back your rake or just winning more money. So always, like maybe on a Sunday morning, check and see if it looks like a few leagues aren't going to fill. I'll try my hardest to enter into one of those leagues. If you want to measure rake, that's total buy-ins minus total cash prizes divided by total buy-ins. I think something like 10% is typically like an average standard rake for most tournaments. What about when selecting a tournament? How much do you pay attention to the max number of entries you could put in?
I think it's huge. As Scott said, there's single entry tournaments and there's also multiple entry tournaments. You really need to pay attention to the type of contest that you're entering. There's plenty of them available at all skill levels. Just depends on the buy-in. Sometimes it's easier to fade the mass multi-enter sharks by entering just a 3 max tournament, for instance. They generally range from a single entry, 3 max entry, 20 max, and 150 is the top. When I'm composing lineups, It depends on the week, how I feel about pricing, how I feel about certain plays. If I want to target one of those 150 entries, I won't let it stop me. Mainly as a GPP player, I'm mainly targeting the highest payouts possible to first place. If an opponent of mine can enter 150 lineups and I'm only willing to enter 10, I'll still do it. I won't let that deter me. But it makes a lot of sense to target those single and 3 max entry ones if you're playing lower volume.
So yeah, in a single entry, I'm just gonna put together my best upside lineup. It's not gonna be my cash lineup, but it's my single best upside lineup with like a lot of value in it. I won't get too cute or too crazy. I know you're a little bit more contrarian in that regard, Tyler. And then in a 3 max, it'll be that same core of guys with maybe just one or two changes. Pretty much the same with 5 entry max, 10 entry max, 20 entry max. I might start considering splitting it up between 2 primary stacks, quarterback, receiver. 150, then I'm going crazy, having a ton of fun. But when it gets like honestly, like I'm not ever entering a tournament where I'm not max entering it. If I'm in a tournament, I want to have that maximum number of entries just to give me what I feel like is the best advantage possible. If you're new to this, you could look at our lineup optimizer. It should make it pretty easy for you. You can export it and then import it directly into DraftKings. You have to, play around with it yourself if you're an elite subscriber, setting your own ownerships, where do you want guys to be. It's an easy way of spotting value, just looking at, the value filter, which contrasts DraftKings or FanDuel or Yahoo's salary with our own projections, or you could just sort by the guys projected to score the most points. You can force stacks, you can avoid stacks, different things like that. Really worth playing around if you're an elite subscriber. If you're not, become one so you can get it. Makes your life a lot easier. There's a humongous edge, I don't care what anyone says, to just having the max number of lineups in a tournament. Definitely, if you're going to be entering in those huge tournaments, I'd try and go out of my way to max enter it. Tyler, you're less concerned, but that's just me.
Yeah, I've taken first place with a single entry and a 150 max. It can be done. It's just the odds are against you.
Tyler, I'm looking at our schedule for this podcast, and it says you want to talk about positions. I disagree. I want to talk to the contrarian DFS master himself and hear you try and convince me to go back to the dark side. Last year, the year before that, I was writing up DFS contrarian plays every single week for PFF, talking about guys I'm fading, why I'm fading, and low-owned guys I'm targeting. I still have way more low-owned guys. That's like typically maybe below 7%. Than the average DFS player for sure, but I've kind of come down a little bit in terms of always fading the chalk like I used to. Tyler, bring me back to the dark side. Let's hear your pitch.
Okay, well, there's a lot of benefits to fading the chalk. The biggest one being if the chalk misses. Say the chalk this week is Le'Veon Bell, and he gets injured in the first quarter. There's nothing you can do about that. Your lineups are likely shot considering how much of your salary you spent on Le'Veon, and fading him when he does poorly helps boost your ranking towards the top of a GPP leaderboard. It doesn't have to be injury. It could just be poor performance, but if that player doesn't do well, you have a great chance of eclipsing all those players that rostered that guy in the process.
Right, so in a tournament, you need to say, finish in the top 15% to really win a decent prize. Again, it depends on the tournament. But if, in this hypothetical scenario, Le'Veon Bell just underperforms for whatever reason, happens a lot in the NFL, and he's, let's say, 50% owned, you immediately wipe away half of your entire competition, which puts you in an awesome spot to really take home one of those top prizes. Definitely get that portion of the strategy. What else are we going to add? What is a contrarian strategy? Does that just mean fading the highest owned player every single week?
No, there's a lot to it. What I like to view it as is thinking outside the box. One thing I like to do is stacking beyond the conventional quarterback wide receiver stacks. That is the most heavily popularized stack because the two correlate so well. What I like to do is go beyond that quarterback, wide receiver, targeting not only
The double stack.
the double stack. So I'll go Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and Martavis Bryant. Sometimes I'll go further if it's a really great game, add Le'Veon Bell. That way you're differentiating yourself from all of the other people making that same exact stack. To take it one step further, you can go with an entire game stack. Say the Steelers are playing the Packers. Those are both high potent offenses. You could just load up on both Packers and Steelers players, hoping that game shoots out. If it eclipses its total, you just stand to benefit by playing those, by rostering those players. Another way to be contrarian is by unique roster construction, and what I mean by that is not always playing the ideal running back or wide receiver flex. Sometimes in a given week there will be obviously like 4 really good running backs that are in play, and you'll see a lot of the field play 2 running backs and then in their flex use that third spot for another running back. You can be contrarian in that sense by putting a wide receiver or possibly even a tight end there to differentiate yourself from the field. If I'm playing 150 lineups, I'll probably do 1 to 2% of them with 2 tight ends given the matchups, just because nobody really does that, and it's a great way to differentiate yourself. Another way is by paying up at certain positions where, say that same running back example, they're all in great spots, they're all kind of pricey. That means most of the field will have to settle for mid-priced, low-priced wide receivers. You can differentiate yourself that way just by paying up for the Antonio Browns, the AJ Greens. Not many people will probably be doing that route, and it allows you to differentiate yourself from the field that way as well.
All right, yeah, that makes sense to me. When are you fading guys? Is it like a certain ownership number you're worried about, like 50% auto fade, 25% auto fade, or is it just if you like don't really like them, or what's going on here?
It depends. Like, say I'm doing 150 lineups, I'll probably want to be underweight on what the field has. If I'm expecting the field to have 40% David Johnson this week, I'll probably want to go maybe 30% if I don't think he's in the most optimal situation to score points. It's really situational there to give you a vague answer.
Yeah, so this is from the year before last. I took a look at ownership percentages on DraftKings back when this was available data. And throughout all of the 2015 season in the Millionaire Maker, there were 41 instances of a player going at least 25% owned. And only 10 of those players reached at least 4x value, which is typically what you want in a tournament on DraftKings. So basically, highly owned players, 25 or more percent, that season had a worse hit rate on average than their ownership. That was a big number that like factored into me, trying to fade players who were over 25% ownership. Last year, of course, the chalk did a lot better because the chalk was David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell every single week. And that kind of ties into why I'm less contrarian. I'm still more contrarian than not, but less contrarian than typical, or at least I was previous. I hedge my bets a little bit. I don't ever really go full fade unless I don't like the player. Otherwise, I might go a partial fade. I also don't like the crazy week-to-week volatility, so I'm just a little less aggressive. I like to make a steady profit if possible. I'm also no longer fading quarterbacks and running backs as much as I will pass catchers and defenses. Quarterbacks are very tied to efficiency. It's really the primary position where efficiency actually matters more than volume. So I'm fine continually paying up for quarterbacks who are continually producing. Running backs goes back to like Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson last year and Devonta Freeman the year before that. It's a position that's just so heavily tied to volume. You can read my Bell Cow article from earlier in the season where I did the correlations. Snaps comes out well above things like targets, carries, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, in terms of correlation to raw fantasy points. So it's just so volume based, and some running backs just clearly get volume every single week. So I won't always fade those guys unless they're very, very highly priced and have a high ownership as well. Just to add one more strategy piece to when you are going contrarian, it's not just about fading. It's not just about targeting low-owned guys to separate yourself from the field. I also like to think about like what scenarios could those highest-owned guys fail. So let's say Jameis Winston and Mike Evans are the chalk in any given week. I'll think to myself, how can I exploit that? What scenarios can I imagine where they turn out to be busts? Let's say maybe the opposing defense just completely eats them up. Winston's getting sacked like crazy, can't make a completion to Evans, who's being double teamed. In that case, I'll go out of my way to play that opposing defense and that opposing defense's running back, which should have plenty of positive game script if these two players are struggling so immensely. So just different ways of thinking of things. I agree with Tyler. I am fairly contrarian, but I also make it a point not to go overboard, especially this year, because I think it's going to be tougher because we don't have the benefit of Thursday ownership. Tyler, so how are you going to be projecting ownership this year?
What I like to do in a given week is listen to as much content and read as much content as possible. What I'm looking for is seeing what other websites, other huge DFS touts are saying, and what kind of plays that they're targeting. Believe it or not, they have a huge influence on what the common person thinks, and I think fading a lot of their popular advice is a great way to go in tournaments. It's kind of hard to project ownership, though. It really is. Adam Levitan from Fantasy Labs does a great job with them for it, but a lot of it comes down to what you're hearing, what makes the most sense from a slate-by-slate perspective, and taking it from there. One thing that I like to do is cross out some of the top price guys at every position in a given week and just go from there. I learned that from Al Smizzle. It's a great way to just knock out what could be the highest owned players at each position and build your lineups from there. Another thing I like to do is look at projected low owned guys that I think might have limited run or aren't in favorable offenses, or guys that, I don't know, guys that still have high ceilings but aren't favorable, and guys that we want in our cash lineup. I'm talking about a guy like Marquise Goodwin, a guy that we saw this last preseason get hit with like a 40-yard strike downfield by Brian Hoyer for a touchdown, just on any given play that they have that upside. Another thing I like to do is mix chalk and low-owned plays. If I'm being contrarian, say I go with Goodwin in a lineup, I might just eat chalk for 8 of the other 9 positions. Even just putting in one contrarian play is a great way to differentiate your lineups. Do you have anything else on this contrarian versus non-contrarian fight we're having?
I don't know. It was a pretty weak fight, considering we were mostly in agreement. But no, I think you summed it up pretty well. After that, I guess it just goes to how you're attacking things differently on DraftKings versus FanDuel. I mean, we already pretty much went over this last week and when we talked about cash, but mostly just FanDuel, you want to be super, super touchdown heavy. Just because it's half-point PPR, there's not the yardage bonuses that DraftKings has. Then on DraftKings, you're a little more concerned with just raw volume, maybe carries, targets, things that could get you over that 100-point bonus. And, of course, targets are everything in a full PPR league. Anything else to add there?
No, I couldn't agree more, and it's not just strictly to FanDuel. It's also DraftKings. I think you're really just targeting heavy touchdown potential, guys that could score at least one touchdown. If you're trying to take down that first place, you're going to need multi-scores from several of your players. The 3-point bonuses on DK for 100 yards is great and all, but those 6-point swings for touchdowns are heavy hammers. Those are the things you want to target.
Exactly. Now let's look at it on a position-by-position basis. starting with kickers. No, just kidding.
We're going to start with quarterbacks. And again, what we're looking for here is multi-touchdown potential. We're going to focus on opponents, red zone trips allowed, passing touchdowns allowed, and the high Vegas team totals. Those are things that we want to pursue. Home favorites are also good targets, but aren't entirely necessary. But we're really just looking for guys that can score in a myriad of ways, either rushing or passing. I think those are the guys we want to look for.
Yeah, agree. Home favorites, same as cash. A little less concerned with mobile quarterbacks with a high floor. Again, we're looking for a high ceiling. We're focused on quarterbacks with a lot of touchdown upside. A few other things I'll look at. Funnel defenses. Pat Thorman, one of our writers, did some great work there. Look for quarterbacks up against defenses really bad against the pass, but really good against the run. So there you should have efficiency as well as volume. And then I'll also look at Vegas spreads and implied totals to look and see if there's any games where two quarterbacks both have really high implied point totals. They're playing each other, but the spread is low, indicating that Vegas thinks it's a shootout. In which case, I'd be looking to target either quarterback or both of them entering multiple lineups, as well as their primary receivers. I think that segues us into wide receivers. What are you looking at among wide receivers?
Opportunity is everything. Again, a lot of this reflects what we talked about in our cash game segment. We're going to look at heavy targets, and we're going to look at high red zone work. Targets from inside the 20, inside the 10, inside the 5. The closer we get, the higher the opportunity cost is for those guys to actually score. Touchdown upside is imperative if you want to win a GPP. So I'm going to be looking for guys that have high red zone potential, a high market share of their offense, and guys that could shake and bake a defender and go to the house. Guys that may hit that 100-yard mark.
Right. Like, let's say last season, Julian Edelman with Rob Gronkowski, he would get a lot of targets, but not a lot of work near the end zone. More of a cash play. Rob Gronkowski, touchdown monster, more of a tournament guy, but he's a tight end. Let's move back to the running back position. What are we looking at there, Tyler?
Again, it's a lot of the same thing. We're looking to focus on snaps, carries, receptions, red zone work. We're just looking for touches here. And again, home favorites are great targets. Touchdowns are much more prevalent in these games. In GPPs, we're just looking for the highest potential score. And in order to get that, they're going to need opportunity. Make sure you're reading Scott's opportunity report. Is that what it's called? Opportunity report?
I don't know if there's a name yet, but read my work on actual opportunity. Again, running backs correlate most heavily. Their fantasy points correlates most heavily to snaps. You want guys who are going to be on the field and be on the field often. They're a pass catching back, and you're going to play them. They should be cheap, but make sure their team's likely to be suffering from a lot of negative game script. The team's going to be passing frequently. If it's the primary runner, doesn't get a lot of receiving work, make sure that team is going to be leading and often. Outside of that, really the bell cows, guys who are just on the field for all three downs, seeing a lot of carries, seeing a lot of targets, not getting spelled by a backup. Those guys are going to be super highly priced. Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson are even more expensive than they were last year, and they were crazy expensive, but they also beat our expectation every single week. Those guys are super valuable, more so than receivers a lot of times, but I'm typically in tournaments playing a wide receiver in the flex unless it's the case where, maybe a running back went down with an injury and a backup is now thrust into a starting position and has a lot of value. Tyler, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you on the heavily priced running backs, but the big problem there is it's sometimes hard from a roster construction viewpoint to get all those guys in and the heavy hammers at wide receiver. So one thing I like to look at is big favorites, guys that might be 6-point or more home favorites. If we can get them in that positive game script where there's that opportunity for touchdowns, those are the guys that I'm looking for. And we might be able to save 2 to 3K in salary in the process. I think that's a huge thing to pursue there. Do you want to look at tight end position next?
Yeah, with tight ends, like Jordan Reed, Rob Gronkowski, Greg Olsen, they're a different story. Tyler Eifert too, just crazy touchdown potential. He's always in play in a tournament. But really what I'm looking at is just guys on teams with a really high implied point total, heavily favored, ideally playing at home, and are getting work near the end zone, and that's about it for me. Just want touchdowns.
I think you nailed it there. The tight end position's often punted, and it could be a real difference maker, though, if you find one that scores. Often it can be a bit of a contrarian strategy to pay up for those top guys that you mentioned when everyone else is spending their money on Le'Veon or Julio or Antonio Brown. Paying up for Greg Olsen or Gronk could be a huge difference maker if he goes for, 20, 30 points. Defense, I think it's pretty much the same as the cash game strategy. We're looking for turnover potential and scoring potential. The only difference here is in tournaments, I like to be very concise with my exposure. I like to go heavy on 2 to 3 that I'm super confident in and can get to the quarterback, disrupt his timing, get him off keel. What I'm looking for is that scoring potential, and I'll find a couple of offensive lines I'm not interested in or a couple of really good edge rushing units and go heavy on them on about 2 to 3 each week.
Right. I'm looking for home favorites, defenses that are both home and favored, ideally playing against bad quarterbacks. Outside of that, I'm not looking too much into things like special teams or anything like that. Maybe I'll look at some sacks, how the opposing offensive line is in contrast to the team's defensive line, how often they're blitzing, how often they get pressure, things like that. But yeah, really just home favorites against a bad quarterback. That's the ideal. Kickers, I think we said last week that it was spread, but looks like I was wrong. The work I was referencing, the author Brian Malone at Rotoviz does a great job. Reran his study and said it was implied point total that had the highest correlation. So I was wrong there. When looking at kickers, just teams that are going to score points.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add there. Not one you want to invest a lot of research in. Just listen to what Denny Carter has to say.
Was that it for today, Tyler?
No, let's look over the Week 1 tournaments. This is a GPP show. Let's see what we have on the slate. DraftKings has some ridiculous Week 1 tournaments for you guys. There's the Billionaire Maker with a B, where if you have the perfect lineup, the highest scoring total possible lineup under the 50K mark, you have a chance to win $1 billion. Make sure you read the fine print there. But the other ones that are more realistic are they're bringing back the Millie Maker. It's a $20 entry, $1 million top prize. The top 24.7% are paid. It's a 150 entry max. It's one of the best ones you could pursue. It's one that I'll be trying to max enter, I think. The next one is kind of intriguing. It's a $2 million play action. It's a $3 entry fee with a 200K top prize. It's a 20 entry max, and the top 24.6% get paid. DraftKings also has a 500K post pattern with an $8 entry and a 50K top prize, where the top 26.4% are paid. That's a little more heavy than the other two, but you're paying a little more in the entry fees to get there. That's a 150 entry max. FanDuels are a little more difficult to get above that 25% mark. They have their Millionaire Maker. It's a $7 entry, 150 entry max. The top 24.5% get paid. They also have a Sunday NFL Bomb. It's a $33 entry. Pretty much the same thing there, except a 250K is the top prize. I don't know why you'd spend more and go for that one. The one thing FanDuel does have that's interesting is a Sunday NFL Spike. It's a $5 single entry with a $15K top prize, and the top 24.5% are paid out. That's one I'm going to be focusing a lot of my attention on to figure out what is the ideal single entry tournament on FanDuel. Those are pretty much it in a nutshell, the great tournaments to look for in week 1. Scott, do you have any overarching thoughts or strategy or things you like to exploit in week 1, or just general GPP thoughts that you have heading into the year?
I know we covered it in the cash pod, but we didn't talk about it today. It's just wide receiver versus cornerbacks. If you're going to be listening to this pod, which you should every single week, we're going to talk about it quite a bit. So, and I think you're doing an article this year for FanVice through PFF on that. Be on the lookout for that. Read all of our stuff, all of our tournament, DFS, redraft stuff, because we're awesome. I don't know. Anything else?
Oh, one thing I like to do is go hard on the first couple weeks. As much as we think we know how the NFL is going to unfold, we really don't know anything. These offenses can look a lot different night and day from how they looked in 2016. So that being said, I'm going to go heavy with my GPP exposure. I'm going to be playing a lot more of my bankroll now than I would throughout the rest of the year. I don't know if that's optimal. Well, right, because the thing is, what I think is a lot of people don't know how the NFL season is going to unfold. We still don't know that, and I like to take advantage of that uncertainty. I'm the same way when it comes to injuries or anything. Anytime there's the possibility of people making suboptimal moves, I'm going to try to up my exposure to that. And week 1's no different. I'm going to go hard this first week.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just do better with a larger data sample. And like right now, we're going off of a muddied 2016 season where rosters look completely different. Whereas like week 5 or week 6, that's when I feel like I really start to get going and start dominating my competition.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone there. I think that's a very common sentiment there. But for a contrarian GPP player like myself, I'm looking for that edge, and this is one of them where there's nothing that we can really control. It's just how the NFL season is going to unfold, and there's a lot of injuries going on now. There's a lot of roster shakeups. There's a lot of depth charts still being finalized, and it's a great way to exploit it if you're paying attention to the news.
All right, man. Well, next week's podcast comes out September 7th in the morning, which is the greatest day of all days, the NFL season opener. Very exciting. We're going to talk about what we want to do for that Thursday night game, as well as all week 1 matchups, top plays. Looking forward to recording with you again next week, Tyler. Where can the folks at home find you on Twitter?
You can find me on Twitter at Tyler Buecher.
And you can find me at Scott Barrett DFB. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Next week's show is going to be awesome. Do not miss it. Thanks for tuning in today.